Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a communication pathologist and clinical neuroscientist. Dr. Carolyn Leaf is also a best-selling author. Her area of research for over 30 years has focused on the mind-brain-body connection. Dr. Leaf is also a mother of four, and she joins us today from Miami. Great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
It's lovely to be with you. Thanks so much.
Let's start, first of all, Dr. Leaf, with having you describe what a communication pathologist does.
Well, the mind-brain-body connection kind of gives it away. So we trained to look at how a person is showing up in the world. So how they're communicating, how they're functioning in every aspect of their lives, and then to trace that back to, what is the source of that? Where is it coming from? And then to help them to embrace, process, and reconceptualize that. So that could be, it could be a language issue, it could be a relationship issue, it could be a trauma issue. It could be a combination of different things. So we looked to sort of the neurological foundation. We also looked to the source, like context, whatever's happening in a person's life, which can affect how they function. We train to deal with trauma. We train to deal with neurological issues like Parkinson's and dementia, ADHD, all that kind of thing. Then I specialized in clinical neuroscience. I went a little deeper in that aspect and still do. I still research. I still do a lot of research.
So when you put both of those areas and fields of study together and you add to it the whole world of the global epidemic that we're currently in of youth mental health and that crisis, what are you seeing that concerns you the most? Is there a statistic, for example, that we should really all take pause and look at and reflect on as we continue to live through this global issue?
Excellent question. And yes, there is a statistic, and the statistic that worries me the most is that we have shifted over the last 2 years, about 2 to 3 years, when they do global world mental health surveys, where they look at different parts of the world. Generally, adults come out worse than children. But for the last couple of years, that's swapped, where children as young as 2 and 3 years of age, all the way through to adolescence and young and teenagerhood, are basically battling more, if not as much more than what adults are. And that's a tremendous concern. And then you look at all the numbers, there's so many different numbers, there's so many different ways of looking at it. You can look at the WHO, you can look at, and there's, generally the idea is that there's a problem and we all accept that. But that problem, what concerns me the most, Leanne, is that the numbers, the statistics, they aren't telling us the full story. They are symptomatic of a bigger story. And that bigger story represents a shift that has occurred over the last 40 years. And that shift has dealt with how we are helping our children and adults manage their minds. So the real problem is how we are allowing ourselves to be human and how we are processing and developing the mental skills to cope with what we're exposed to in a changing world. That has changed dramatically. And if you take that aspect out of how we function as humans, if you take the managing of the mind aspect away from humans or reduce it, you're going to land up with and you change that into a focus on the biological, kind of in a reductionistic way, you are going to land up with the epidemic that we see. So it's not like the world's facing issues for the first time. There has never been a time in man's history that we haven't faced some crisis. There's always crises. That's just the nature of humanity. So if we talk about why this increase, most of the time people will say, well, it's because of technology. Yes, that's a contributing factor, but technology's, there's been advances all through time and history, so we can't blame it on an advance like technology. Social media, AI, we see those kinds of things as being major causes. Those are external causes. They're not the cause. They're external things, I should rather say, as opposed to causes. So they're not the problem. What is the problem is how we're managing them and how we're teaching ourselves and our children how to manage the impact and what those mean for the changes in the world that we live in. And that involves processing. It involves having the mental skills to know what to do with those emotions when someone's bullying you at school, or when you've been left out of a group, or you're getting all these horrible messages on social media, or you are spending so much time just on jumping from one social media platform to the next, and TikTok, and watching a lot of TV and that kind of thing, without balancing that out with the reading. That creates disruptions inside the brain and the body that will make you feel anxious and depressed, will generate a sense of dis-ease that will then make a child react in certain ways. And that isn't because they've got a brain damage or because they've got a mental illness. That's because the brain is being stimulated incorrectly and the mind is being stimulated incorrectly. And if that's not managed and we don't teach ourselves and our children how to recognize that, all of those cumulatively, I've just mentioned a few things. How does a child deal with what's going on in the change in terms of politics? What are you doing in terms of your own life as a parent? You go through changes. How are you explaining that to your children? You add all of those factors up and you're putting a child in the world with all this stuff, and what on earth do I do with it? So I'm feeling weird, and that weirdness is coming out in certain emotions and certain behaviors. And when it comes out in certain emotions and certain behaviors, the current model is, oh my gosh, my child's showing anxiety. They must have a mental health problem because of what the media is saying, mental health. You put a child into an environment that we're currently in and you don't give them the tools and the mental skills to understand that if I'm feeling this anxiety, maybe it could be because I've been looking at too much social media, or maybe, if you don't tell them that, if I'm sad as an adult or I'm going through stuff and I don't explain to my child, look, I'm sad because of this and this is how I'm managing it. If you don't give those kinds of skills and we just try to hide our sadness, children respond to authenticity. They respond to being honest. They do what you do. They can read body language better than an adult. And if they don't get things explained to them, all of that, they're going to then think there's something wrong with them. They're going to immediately think, what have I done? So then the identity gets challenged. So now they're trying to deal with stuff at home and all the changes in the world, and no one's telling them how to manage that. You put that together, you're going to have a mind management crisis that will manifest as a mental health crisis. Now, that's a long answer, but I hope that makes sense. And you're welcome to dig deeper if you need more clarity there.
Well, lots to unpack, certainly. And I'd like to start with the fact that I think a pain point for a lot of parents who don't have the background and experience and expertise that you do is, how do I recognize what is age appropriate for my child in terms of explaining to them whatever the situation is, explaining my emotions? That's number one, because you did allude to the fact in the title of your book, the subheading talks about, children ages 3 to 10 struggling with anxiety, depression, and mental health challenges. Age 3 is, unfathomable going to be unfathomable for a lot of our listeners and viewers. So how does a parent know what is age appropriate and where even to start?
It's overwhelming, especially with everything going on out there and the message we're getting. So the first thing to recognize is, the reason I wrote this book is to try and help parents do this. So the first thing is to recognize that children as young as 2 through United States, Canada, unfortunately, Australia, these kinds of sort of more very psychiatrically dominant type countries are labeling children as young as 2 with things like bipolar depression. Now, first of all, bipolar depression, it's a description. It's not a thing. It's not a disease. And there's a lot of inaccurate science around that particular concept. There's also no ways that you can actually make that kind of diagnosis. So what's happening, which also relates to your first question, is there's a lot of pathologization or pathologizing of normal childhood behaviors or medicalizing of misery instead of discussing the behavior and explaining the misery. Okay, so based on that, we need to recognize, first of all, as parents, that our children need to understand the world that they're in. So if a child is not secondly, a child is not intentionally ever trying to be difficult. Children aren't trying to be a behavior problem. They're not trying to be naughty. They're not trying to do things to upset you. They are trying to understand the world around them. And if they don't know, they experiment, and they're like little scientists, and they're trying to understand. And yes, they do things and hurt, maybe throw toys and whatever, but it's not their intention is to learn, to understand, to process. That's what they're doing. So when we see our children manifesting with a pattern of behaviors and emotions and perspectives and bodily sensations, 4 things. When we see our children starting to show up with a pattern, now the 4 signals are emotions, behaviors, bodily sensations, and perspective. Those are the 4 categories of how we show up as humans. So if you look at those 4 categories and ask yourself, what are my child's emotions, behaviors, bodily sensations, and perspectives, how they're looking at life? in a pattern. What are the patterns that are showing up? A pattern means it's become a habit, something that's happened more than just once, and it's not being managed. So it's not become so something's happened more than once, and a child then, that's wired into the mind brain body connection, and a child will then develop a coping mechanism, and that coping mechanism manifests in those 4 signals. So what we do is you look for patterns in those 4 signals. So if your child does something one-off, like a one-off, they come home from school and there's a one-off crying or tantrum incident, and it's pretty easy to sort of resolve, because it's something different. It's out of the norm, and you can see, and you can talk it through. Hey, are what's happening? You're really upset today. That isn't what we do all the time. It's when you see a consistent pattern that you notice your child is withdrawing more every day, and you've noticed it for the last 3 weeks, and you've noticed that their sleeping's changed, and you notice they're having nightmares, and any combination. So not sleeping would fall under behaviors, nightmares would fall under behaviors, showing anxiety would be an emotion, not wanting to go to the park, where they always used to love to go to the park, would be a perspective. There's a shift in their perspective. Behaviors, a body sensation, complaining of headaches constantly, or suddenly complaining of stomach aches, or especially when you're going to a certain place or going. So in summary, to look at those 4 signals as a way of showing up in a pattern. What patterns is your child showing that are different? And then when you see, okay, there's a pattern for sure, something's happening repeatedly. I've noticed it for more than a week. I've noticed it for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And then to say, okay, what is the pattern? Break it down into what are the behaviors, what are the emotions, what are the body sensations, what are the perspectives. In the book, I explain this in incredible detail, but simple detail with a lot of technique. So it like walks the parent through step by step how to do this and what to look for. What I've also done is broken it down into age groups in terms of, there's a table which is like, what do you ask a 3 to 5-year-old versus a 5 to 8-year-old, 6 to 8-year-old versus a 9 to 10-year-old, that kind of thing. What is a signal that a 3 to 5-year-old would show versus a 10-year-old? So like a 3-year-old, if they're very upset about something that's happened at school, may throw a tantrum. So they get in the car, they kick the car seat, they throw their juice over, they don't want to talk to you, they maybe scream. A 10-year-old may just withdraw, not look at you, just sit very quietly, go straight to their room, that kind of thing, not want to eat much. So, eating back. So that's the sort of thing that you can, I've got a lot of those kinds of examples that can help make that distinction. But to start with pattern, what's the pattern? If it's just a one-off, it's okay. What's the pattern? And before you think, oh my gosh, this is a mental illness, we've got to be very careful of that biomedical model. Don't pathologize or medicalize your child. Just remember that pattern is actually telling you something. That's the child trying to tell you through their behaviors and emotions and perspectives and bodily sensations. They are non-consciously trying to tell you something. And you want to then sit down with them and process that. Does that answer your question? Does that give you...
It absolutely does. And we should mention that your latest book is called How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. And we are going to talk a bit more about the research that you undertook for that book. But Dr. Leaf, I did want to ask you, you talk about pathologizing, and I wonder if there's ever times where parents are key contributors to their children's mental health stress, strains, distress. Are there examples shown through science where this is the case?
Absolutely. So unintentionally, we affect our children. It's just one of those things. Our parents messed up, us up, and we're going to mess our children up. But now that sounds like such a negative statement, but it's a very realistic statement. It doesn't mean that we can't get through it, because whatever's broken can be repaired. And when we recognize broken and we repair, we grow. So that's just to encourage people. So the guilt that goes along with parenting, especially with the momfluencer and everything social media out there is very, very hard for parents to deal with. So it just starts with saying, listen, it's okay to be a mess. I have made a mess. And start at that point, giving yourself just, some grace and permission. Then say, okay, so let me see how I'm affecting my child. So the science does show that our stress is basically going to become the stress of our child, our anxiety, our depression. Now, all of those aren't things, they are emotional warning signals. So being stressed is a behavior. Being anxious and depressed is an emotional warning signal. The stress is a behavioral warning signal. So whatever we experience is from something. And if we don't manage it in front of our children to a certain extent. And I can explain the difference of what do you actually show your child in terms of management, what don't you show your child, because they don't need all the details, but they need enough. Whatever you're experiencing, however, is going to pass through to the child. They're going to see it. They're going to feel it. They respect, as I said, authenticity. So the research is very, very clear on that. Children are way more insightful than what for years the literature's actually said. And there's almost being a dumbing down of the child. An 18-month-old, even younger, they know what's right. They already have a sense of what's right and wrong, even younger than that. A 2-year-old is quite, my youngest patients were 2 and 3 years old. I did family therapy with families of, with children that young, and children, they see things. Their ability to understand is way, way, way in advance of their ability to express what they are processing and taking in. But because it's through the filter of a child, that they have insight, but that insight is very much guided by the parent. So the best way, and I get asked this question you've asked so often, is what's similar to the question you've asked, what would I do if I had to do one thing to help with this mental health crisis? And it kind of relates to your question. And my answer is help the parent first, educate the parent first. If you want to help your child, it's going to start with you. So throughout all the work that I've done with adults and children, when it comes to children, I will tell the adults, work on yourself first. You need to be honest with yourself, and you need to be honest with your children. So if you come home from work, or you're going through something at work, even if you don't go to work so many of us work remotely, is if something's happening and it's affecting how you are functioning in that moment, and you've got young kids, don't pretend nothing's happening. It's way better for you if you come out your office or something and you're feeling really disturbed. They're going to see it on your face. They're going to see it in your body language. It's way better for you to say, I'm really not feeling great at the moment. I don't want to snap at you, but I may snap at you if you scream too loud when you're playing, or if you demand my attention right now. I'm just not in a place because I've got to sort out something. And whatever the age appropriate language, if you're dealing with a 3-year-old, mommy's feeling not so good now, I'm going to play with you a little bit later. And an older child, hey, I'm not feeling great now. There's something that's happened and I've got to resolve it. And this is what I'm going to do. And the key thing here is you then acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging those 4 signals. I'm feeling not so great now. It's going to make me potentially be a bit quiet, and I might be a bit snappy behavior. I'm a bit worried about something perspective in this moment because I'm trying to solve it. And I kind of got a bit of a headache because of this. So I've identified for the child and I've demonstrated, I've modeled what I'm going through. Now that's the first step. Now I know one of the things that we were going to talk about on my 5 steps. So if I can blend that in here, it'll make it very easy for people to understand. So the first thing you do as a parent to help your child, so that the research shows it goes through in order to, in both ways, the research shows that if we are unmanaged stress, becomes the unmanaged stress of the child. Or managed stress becomes the managed stress of the child. So that's what the research is showing. So the work I've done is to say, okay, well, if that's the case, let me manage my stress in front of the child, or manage my anxiety, or manage whatever I'm going through, the situation, and how to make him react. And therefore I'm teaching the child. So then the system that I developed to do that is called the neurocycle. And the neurocycle is basically a 5-step process that is based on the most hectic science that I'm not going to go into. There is books and research in my work if people want to know the science behind it. But essentially, it makes the mind, brain, body connection, which are 3 different things. Mind is sort of our energy and our ability to psychologically, mentally operate. And it drives the body. Our brain is the physical brain, and the body is the body. They're 3 separate things that have to work together for us to function. Every experience we have goes into the mind, brain, body connection as a change. So every experience we have all day long as parents, children, is wiring into this mind, brain, body network all the time. The more stable and the more established it becomes, the patterns that it makes or habits, those then drive how we function. So that's the basic operating principle of the neurocycle. Stuff gets in to the mind-brain-body connection, and then it influences how we function. That's that whole question of what does a communication pathologist do? And in a clinical neuroscientist, we look at, okay, how are you showing up, and where's that coming from, and how can we rewire it? How can we rewire the network? So I've made all that complex stuff as simple as I can for people to be empowered to help yourself and to help your children, because the unmanaged stress of the parent becomes the unmanaged stress of the child. So essentially what you the way that you help yourself to help your child is by you applying this system, which then helps to rewire that driving force inside of you into something that is manageable. So you embracing, processing, and conceptualizing, you reconstructing. So the 5 steps of the neurocycle do all this amazing brain science stuff. As you're doing it, all these changes are happening in your mind and your brain and your body, and changing then how you show up. By you going through the cycle, and I'll demonstrate one in a moment, you then are giving your child, through them observing you, managing your issue, you giving them the mental skills. Once they see you do that, you're then in a position to collaborate with them and to help them say, hey, when they come home from school and they are upset, or they come back from a friend, or they read something on social media, or that you see this pattern reacting, you can say, hey, remember when mom was so sad the other day when this thing happened at work, and remember how we did that thing that I called the neurocycle, and you helped me to resolve, and what you helped me to fix it, and I will demonstrate in a moment. Do you want to try doing that with this, how you feel now? And they're going to be much more inclined then to say, yes, I need some help. And so you can establish that framework. Okay, so let's quickly come back to the neurocycle, and then I can show you, if you want, I can then give you a simple way how you can get your kids into this process. So essentially, you're going to gather awareness. First step is to gather awareness. And the gathering awareness is for you to make 4 little sentences. I feel anxious, or I feel a bit upset. To give our example, I've got a bit of a headache. So upset emotion, headache, bodily sensation, behavior. I might be a little bit quiet and I might be a little bit irritable today. So you've identified that. And my perspective, I'm feeling very upset about something. I'm not so good at the moment, the way I'm looking at things. You could even use sunglasses if a child's very young and say, I've got these broken sunglasses. You could put those on. You can have little boxes with all those 4 different emotions. You can have pictures. You can have objects. You can just have them available in an area of your house. You can have a toy box filled with these things. I give you lots of examples in the book. And you could, if it's a very young child, you could literally go and pick out a picture and say, this is how I'm feeling, or you could draw it, that kind of thing. Then you would go to the next step and you would say, this is why. The next step is to reflect. And keep it very simple. If it's a 3-year-old, you're just going to say, Mommy's sad, and just one sentence with all those 4 things. Mommy's sad and got a bit of a headache, and it's because something happened at Mommy's work, when Mommy was busy on the computer. Something simple like that. So you're giving a bit of a why, of why you're feeling that, through the what, the when, the where, the why. So it could be, I'm worried because my boss shouted at me at work, or we're doing something very difficult that I don't know how to do, and I'm very scared, or something, whatever. Be honest, because you want them to collaborate with you. Then the 3rd step is to do like a mind dump, is to get out what you've experienced down onto paper. So you can either have a little chalkboard, you could paint a section of your house if you want to. My sister-in-law painted a wall in her kitchen with chalk paint, and that was where they would write. You can have a notebook inside that toy box with those other boxes. So you can have an area that's designated or something like that where you can write, and you pull that out and you actually just write pictures or words, depending if it's a child, or pictures, smiley face, sad face. Even if it's a child who's not literate yet, you could still put words, because you're teaching them the picture word association. So it's pre-reading skills. So it's very good for them. So it becomes, a whole interactive activity. In doing that, you've invited your child in to facilitate and collaborate with you, which is teaching them the art of empathy, collaboration, sharing. It's safe for mom to share with me and for me to help mom. So it must be safe for me to share with mom and mom to help me, or dad, or whatever, brothers, aunt, caregiver. And so then you draw a few pictures. If it's a young child, maybe a few words to just describe how you feel, maybe a little phrase. There's lots of ideas of how you can do it. You can even dramatize it. You could pick up I have this, where's my brainy toy? I actually have a plush toy that we've created in a coloring book. They're not in my office at the moment. And that's of a character called Brainy, who walks your mental health journey with you. It's throughout the book. The whole book's got the cartoons of Brainy in it. And we've got the toy and coloring book and everything that's great for the younger child. Even the adults are using this for inner child work and for older children and themselves and so on. So you write it down. That brings stuff out and invites this collaboration and starts making sense of the chaos that any kind of disruptive experience can do, like a horrible conversation at work or something, which is our example we're using now. Then what you do is you look at what you've written, and then you invite the collaboration. They may or may not join you, but children are very, very caring and very actually full of empathy and are very excited to jump in and help. They may just come up close and touch your face. They may actually pick up a piece of chalk and write on the wall. They may pick up a pen and start drawing, but you're inviting them to enable you to connect. And so you then now go into what the fourth step, which is the recheck. So this is what's happened. What can I do? I wonder what I could do. Maybe I could, we could bake something together to make me feel better. And and maybe your child says, and you'll be amazed at what kids come up with. When I did family therapy, years of being in this field, kids will come up, and you as a parent will have experienced this. They come up with solutions that are so simple. They may not be the most accurate solution, but they have a grain of something that you could actually go away with. So in other words, your fourth step is you reconceptualizing. This is what's happened. What can I do about it? Then the fifth step is, okay, let's do an action. That's a great idea. Thank you for that idea. I'm going to send my boss an email, but you know what? Let's go and bake something together, or let's take the dog for a walk, or whatever. So that's very simple run through of how you can use it. And there's a multiplicity of different ways that you can use the neurocycle in different scenarios, which I've created. Like, for example, if you recognize trauma in your child, or an identity issue, or their sleep issues, or whatever. But the big thing here is you use it, which then invites them. So you're working on this together.
So much to unpack in what you just said there. But I think one of the key points that maybe our listeners and viewers may take away is, a lot of them would have grown up in a different time and raised in a very different way, and conditioned not to share their feelings, conditioned not to wear their stress, etc., etc. Now you are coming along based on the science saying there's nothing wrong with sharing your emotions. That's a big leap for a lot of people, a lot of parents. The other piece that really comes through in what you're saying is the importance of self-awareness as a parent and role modeling. So when you were sitting down to look at all this research, Dr. Leaf, and put it together into the book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, what would you say your approach was in terms of distilling the science to give and to make a guide ultimately for parents?
I had to work, excellent question, by the way. I had to work with young children as young as 2. So you can't tell them heavy science, but children as young as 2 will love pictures of the brain and will love to know that they relate to science on a very basic level. So I had to be able to distill the science to that level, as well as to a parent that's so freaked out by, a child's behavior or something that's going on, or dealing with a trauma situation if a child's been abused and, this pattern's emerging, or dealing with a child who's got a major learning disability, or dealing with an adult who's gone through trauma, or who's dealing with dementia themselves, or a parent with dementia. So I worked with all those categories. So in that situation, you can't use a lot of big words and big science, but people do love science. So that's what I've tried to do, is to I do still write scientific journal papers. I do all that stuff, but I've had to learn to take those very difficult concepts and make them very simple. So when I say something like the awareness, just say 4 sentences, it sounds so simple, which it is. And it's so powerful, and it creates a level of awareness, but it comes from based on huge amounts of science and experience of working with patients. I've been in the field 38 years, so that's really trained me to distill it. Probably the easiest example to kind of summarize this idea is if you think of flying a plane. The neurocycle concept is like that. Helping our children with their mental health is a bit like flying a plane. Not that you're going to fly a plane, but the idea, the plane gets prepared in the airport before there's a whole plan around which plane takes off at what time, and that particular plane's got to be on the runway at that. It's a lot of preparation that goes into it. So the first thing we need to do is prepare our brains and bodies and minds, because they're 3 parts. And that's where when a child's highly anxious, or you're highly anxious or something, you're not just going to dive in and do the neurocycle. You're first going to calm down. And that's the good old fashioned breathing. And I've got so many decompression, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of help for that. I have an app as well. I'm not sure if you're aware. I have an app called the Neurocycle, which is available on iTunes and Google Play, and also on web. And that essentially has got all this stuff in, like a therapy program, and also for parents. Okay, so you prepare the plane, and then you take off. When they take off, incredibly organized, and you've got to know the skill. Now, if you don't take off, you've got all this preparation that you've done, but you don't go anywhere. And this is what a lot of people do with mental health. They do a lot of breathing and that kind of stuff, but then they don't do anything else but that, so they don't move forward. It's kind of a band-aid. If you prepare and you gather awareness, that's great because now you've taken off. But if the pilot doesn't know how to fly, the pilot's going to crash. And what we're seeing from the research is that if we just get awareness and then we just do an action, if you jump from step 1 to step 5, because step 5 is the action, you miss out the middle, you're going to crash. And a lot of current therapeutic approaches to mental health are pretty good at the preparing, the breathing stuff, and pretty good at create, I feel this and that. But you've got to link the I feel to the other 3 signals. You've got to see the interrelation. You've got to go through the whole process. So the middle part is flying. So to reflect, to write, and to recheck. And then the active reach, the action at the end, that's landing the plane. So always think of working in a cycle. Many people crash and their children crash because they just prepare, or they don't prepare and they just gather awareness, or they just do a technique or to some hodgepodge. So that doesn't change the mind and body connection. It doesn't have sustainability. And that often leads to labeling and all kinds of things.
Now, your book focuses on the age groups of 3 to 10 years old, but I wonder if you could summarize the impact of not addressing what you've described when kids are younger on the long and the short term when they become teens and adolescents and young adults.
Absolutely. So the unmanaged stress of ourselves goes through into our later stages of life. So the effect of stress on unmanaged stress has been very well established. I've done a lot of work and research around how this changes the mind-brain-body connection. So if we have an unmanaged suppressed issue that we don't deal with, so let's say something happens like a major trauma. Let's take a big thing like sexual trauma happens, and the child, as a child, they'll develop a coping mechanism, and depending on how severe, how long, etc., the coping mechanism is that it's to cope, but it's not something that's sustainable. If it's not dealt with, that is a whole physical thing that's built into the mind brain body connection. It's part of the things that drive them. That then shows up at different stages of their life in different ways. They can get very depressed, they can battle with relationships and show up in behavior problems, they can get addicted. All of those aren't diseases, they are just the coping mechanisms that have got out of hand because of the undealt with issue. So what we never forget anything. Nothing ever goes away. Every experience that you've had, that sexual trauma, whatever it may be, never goes away. But what we can do, which is what we're not teaching children, which circles and adults, circles back to your very first question, is how do we manage that? Because if we don't, it will go through to adolescence and adulthood and impact all manner of our life in different ways and whatever. And that's basically what we call mental health. What we have to do is recognize where it's going to break down. And that's what the neurocycle concept I've tried to do, is to try and help people understand this recognize the things that are showing up as patterns, and then deconstruct that down to where did this come from? Okay, this is not going to go away. But like with children, you can explain it like a tree. And what you're doing is the roots are the source. So the roots are the trauma, the sexual abuse, the bullying, what happened. So you've got to get there. You've got to do the work to get down there. So the neurocycle helps you to get to the root. Now, you can't pull the tree out because it's happened, it's there, but you can put plant food on and you're healing the roots. And that's the whole, and it takes time. It's a daily process over cycles of what my research has shown. It takes around 9 weeks, cycles of 9 weeks. So it's about anything from 5 to 45 minutes a day over a 9-week period. And you might need multiple cycles, but that's how long it takes to heal those roots and grow that tree, that the toxic issue shrinks. If you think of a big ugly tree at the beginning of the trauma, as you go through the process, you then eventually, by healing the roots, the ugly part of the tree shrinks and becomes just one branch on the tree, and now you've got this beautiful green tree, which is the new way of how it's going to play out in the future. And that skill, if we can teach our children now, as things happen in life, which they will, you are proactively teaching them that skill. And then as adults, when things happen, you've got the skill. As adults, my first work I worked parallel, but some of my first research was with adolescents and adults. So I also have the books and app and everything for adolescents and adults, as well as the children.
Dr. Carolyn Leaf, so much that you have shared with us today. Communication pathologist, clinical neuroscientist, author of How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. We so appreciate your time and your expertise today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.